The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been around for almost 15 years now. We've experienced villains becoming heroes, heroes sacrificing themselves for the future, and even the future roster of heroes themselves. It's a nerdy CGI emotional roller coaster, and we all love it. Sometimes. Depending on the show. Oh man. But how far has Marvel really come? And do the original movies still hold up almost 15 years later? Well, in this series, we're gonna find out. Starting with... So, Iron Man 1 was released in 2008, directed by Jon Favreau, starring Robert Downey Jr. This was around the time where Robert Downey Jr. was making a comeback to Hollywood after going through multiple drug rehab programs and even prison. We didn't know it at the time, but this movie held the future of the MCU in the palms of its rocket-thrustered hands, and it was a masterpiece.
Language!
The film starts in the deserts of Afghanistan, blasting AC/DC, and just within a few minutes, Robert Downey Jr. is completely able to channel the essence of Tony Stark. From his narcissistic behavior to even his playboy antics.
Yes and no. March and I had a scheduling conflict, but fortunately the Christmas cover was twins.
But we get no time, because there's a very hectic war scene.
You stay here, God! That's an order! I gotta find Bubba!
You know, being in a time where everything is just a big CGI mess, it was kind of nice to see like a really raw and grounded like war scene, and like all the effects were practical, so that was really cool too, and the scene itself was just pretty suspenseful. And then he's captured. Oh no, Tony Stark, he's captured by terrorists. What are we gonna do? We see him in the center of a hostage video, but the thing is, all the terrorists behind him are repping the logo of the 10 Rings. They're out here looking like a playable team in NBA 2K. Now, maybe I should remind you, at this point, Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings, the movie, was nowhere near to being released. But in theory, if you look at the MCU timeline, Wenwu was over thousands of years old. And we know he has branches of people doing stuff for him around the world, so I wouldn't be too surprised to find out that that section did work for Wenwu at some point. Or completely not. Maybe they just be a group of crazy people that just really like the idea of the 10 Rings. Because the difference between this logo and the regular 10 Rings logo is that in this one, they have Mongolian script in the center of each circle, and that itself is actually an Easter egg to the comic books where they reference that the Mandarin is the descendant of Genghis Khan. So I just thought I'd point that out. Yeah, we love Marvel facts. Marvel facts. We then cut to black and we see a very simplistic 3D title. Man, I miss the early 2000s. We then get some background information on Tony Stark and his life leading up to this moment through a slideshow that almost looks like something I made back in high school the night before it was due.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
But through that slideshow, we are introduced to the main villain of the movie, Obadiah Stane, who honestly has one of the best lines in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps. We'll talk about that scene later. Oh, and shout out Terrence Howard, you know, for only being in this movie. He probably discovered Pythagoras and the Platonic solids after this.
I've made some discoveries in my own personal life. You know, Pythagoras was searching for all waves are curved, so where does the straight lines come from to make the Platonic solids?
You know, with the way Terrence Howard thinks, I wouldn't be surprised if he knew where all the Infinity Stones were.
I was able to open up the flower of life properly, the real wave conjugations.
But actually, the relationship between Rhodey and Tony is pretty good. They have this, like, too cool to say we're best friends, but we're best friends / protective father and irresponsible son vibe, if that makes sense. The casino scene was actually really cool. You get to see those two characters in, like, a real-life social environment, gambling, rizzing up women, and I think it's hilarious that Tony Stark's clap back at the reporter, and then later that night, claps her cheeks. Then they have this little interaction in Tony Stark's house, which I think is actually just a funny scene, because the reporter's walking around and then she like pokes Jarvis in his no-no square, and Jarvis is like, "Oh, you cannot be here, madam. Please leave immediately." That's how Jarvis sounds. But side note, Jarvis in the movie is voiced by Paul Bettany, who will eventually become the Vision in the MCU. But at this time, he was just the voice of Jarvis. Then, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow comes in as Pepper Potts, who delivers one of the most savage burns I've ever freaking heard.
I do anything and everything that Mr. Stark requires, including occasionally taking out the trash.
Pepper is a great character. The way they were able to take a professional relationship between a playboy philanthropist CEO and his secretary and turn them into a loving family with a daughter is a beautiful story. But enough about the lovey-dovey stuff, because we're going back to Afghanistan. We awake with Tony Stark in a cave, recovering from surgery. This moment is the beginning to one of the best character arcs of all time. We also meet Jensen, the man who saves his life, which is honestly one of the best Marvel side characters that have ever existed, and it's sad because no one really talks about him anymore. Like, homeboy had me crying later on during his death scene. Jensen is practically responsible, metaphorically and literally, for the creation of Iron Man. Not only did he actually help him build the Mark I in that cave, he made Tony Stark think about the idea of his legacy.
Legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see.
And the suit building scene itself was pretty rad, man. It was cool seeing what homeboy can make in a cave with a box of scraps. But it wasn't as rad as him actually fighting his way out the cave. Oh my god, absolutely incredible. Ah man, you gotta love that Mark I armor, dude. He's out here looking like Jon Favreau's character in The Mandalorian. Wait. Is that an Easter egg?
Because I'm happy.
Ah man, but back to Jensen. His actual death scene was so sad. It made me cry. Good tear in my eye. F in the chat for Jensen. But that moment itself is actually one of the most impactful moments in Tony Stark's life. After an epic escape and a not so graceful fall. Did you see how hard he landed? You know, for a second I thought homeboy landed next to Loki in the TVA. Tony Stark was then rescued and was desperate for some burgers.
Man, I got these cheeseburgers, man.
Now, the press conference scene is actually pretty interesting because it introduces Phil Coulson for the first time. You know, Phil Coulson, the guy who's like prominent in other MCU films. And depending on who you ask, he's also in the totally, kinda, definitely, maybe, 100%, but not really, canon show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
That's quite a mouthful.
Seeing Tony Stark invent in any aspect is always awesome. Tony Stark's brain is like one of his best strengths, and boy did they show it off in this movie. The scene in the Mark II where he's just flying around and like experimenting all around Malibu is so fun. It reminded me of like me when I was playing the Iron Man VR game. Oh, this is crazy. Dude, is this what freaking Tony Stanksy is? Wow, this is freaking crazy. Look at my hands. I'm freaking Iron Man. We're basically the same guys. Oh my god, I'm Iron Man. And I always loved the visor effect, you know, of Robert Downey Jr. inside the helmet. It's so freaking cool. It's an effect that is used for the entirety of the MCU. Even now with Rhodey and Riri Williams, all of it happened because of Tony Stark. That party scene was actually pretty cool because they did a great job at inciting Tony to like confront Obadiah and start teasing the dark side of him. And then it leads to probably one of the most dope scenes in the entire MCU history. Iron Man fighting terrorists is one of the most badass things I've ever seen, and for some reason I've never felt more American watching it.
America! Yeah!
Oh, and the tension alone from Iron Man running from the F-22s and then causes the accident, and the whole like, scene with the parachute where like the parachute guy was falling and he couldn't get the chute open and everybody was like,
Negative! No shoot! No shoot! My shoot's jammed!
and then Iron Man saved the freaking day, man. It was awesome. We then get a scene with Obadiah Stane meeting with the leader of the Ten Rings, essentially backstabbing him and more than likely killing them all. Obadiah throughout the entire film was kind of like this menacing, overlooking father figure for Tony until later where he's revealed to be the big bad, and then he goes full baddie. I thought the character itself was portrayed very well, and I think he's a good villain. I wouldn't say he's like the top MCU villain, but he's a good villain for this movie. Which then leads to the best freaking scene ever, man.
Please don't let me build this cave! With a bunch of scraps!
And the cool thing about this scene is that now we have context over the years, so now we know that this scientist is the same scientist who becomes the second hand for Mysterio in Spider-Man Far From Home. So it's all connected, man. It's all connected. Oh. So Obadiah goes full dark side and literally yanks Tony Stark's heart out, which kind of reminded me like how much his like heart reactor was much of a cripple for him. Like seeing him with his heart out was actually a very suspenseful scene, and I kind of wish that vulnerability stayed around in the MCU longer, although I do understand why, because it could just be a repetitive tactic that gets pulled over and over again. So I understand why they fixed it in a later film. I also think it's funny that they teased War Machine and Terrence Howard was still like, nah. He's like, nah, I'm good. So the Iron Man versus the Ironmonger scene itself was actually pretty cool, but this is around the time in the film where the practical effects are being leaned off and they're going more heavy into the CGI, which makes sense, you know, with the big robot fighting a smaller robot. How are you going to do that practical and make it look really good? But because they leaned so heavily on CGI and it was the early 2000s, the pacing of the scene itself was actually kind of slow. And when Obadiah Stane himself got shocked by that big old arc reactor, why did he look like Mr. Electric from Shark Boy and Lava Girl? But finally, we reached the final press conference, where Tony Stark delivered probably one of the most iconic lines in film history, and that is, "I am Iron Man." The film was honestly fantastic. Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. and the rest of the cast did a great job. Oh, did you think we were done? No. Not only was this the first movie to be released in the MCU, it was the first movie with a post-credit scene.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
Bruh, they teased the Avengers, a movie that wouldn't happen like 4 movies later from this point in time. Kevin Feige has been freaking teasing long-form story arcs through post-credit scenes since the very freaking beginning. Overall, I think Iron Man is a great film and still holds up to this day. I love the performance of Robert Downey Jr., Jensen made me cry. The use of practical effects were actually pretty dope, and the film was a great starting point for the MCU. How do you feel? Do you agree, or do you think Iron Man 1 was completely trash? And what about the next film that got released? A lot of people tell me it's great, but I heard the next movie is incredible. But that's just me. Bye!
Thanks for watching, hey, and please subscribe. Maybe leave a comment, maybe even leave a like. Thanks for watching and accumulating by what time the video was over, so you know I gotta go. Thanks for watching, hey, and please subscribe. Maybe leave a comment, maybe even leave a like. Thanks for watching and accumulating by what time the video is over, so you know I gotta go.